Anytime something like this happens, and sadly that's been too often in recent years, we love to bring in John Matthews, who really did write the book on how to deal with mass shootings. It's called Mass Shootings, 6 Steps to Survival. You're the director of the Community Safety Institute. As part of your book, you studied what, 60 mass shootings from the past?
Unfortunately, it's up to almost 90 now.
Jeez.
Every single mass shooting since 1980, our team looked at it, and we didn't focus on the shooter. Somebody else can do that. We focused on the victims. What can the everyday citizen do to survive these attacks? And so what we looked at is the actions taken and the decisions made by all the previous victims.
And you mentioned, you know, that you will in fact study what happened in Las Vegas at some point and incorporate that into the knowledge base that you have created over the years. Let's talk a little bit about the Vegas situation. We've pulled it up here. This is roughly where the concert was taking place here. It looks a lot closer to the Mandalay Bay Hotel than it actually is. You've got a huge boulevard that separates the two here, and it's fairly far apart. But the gunman in this case, this hotel is 40 some odd stories high. He was perched up on the 32nd story somewhere over here in the corner, and you were just talking to us earlier about the preparation that went into this. It was a fair amount of preparation.
He had been there since September 28th, we found out. I imagine that he watched the entire setup of the event, probably where the barricades were, where the fencing was, where the people were going, how they could get out, other exits. So he was planning the entire time. He knew that if he broke out windows in 2 different areas of his hotel room, he could expand his killing zone. So he was only able to see a certain part of the venue. By breaking out the other window, he could now see another part of the venue, adding to the body count and
he
adding
took full
to the
advantage of that.
A lot of preparation. He had shooting platforms, platforms you can stick your rifle on so that you fire. He knew to bring multiple weapons that they were going to heat up and they were going to get smoky. He set off the smoke detector. That's one of the ways that they found him.
Let's talk a little bit about, since we're talking about preparation, let's talk about preparation on behalf of the organizers of this concert event down here. They had about 22,000 people packed into here. You know, I know it's very preliminary right now and that you will study this in much more detail as time goes by. What are some of the things that really stood out to you, though, as things that kind of went wrong?
Well, one thing we saw a video of this morning, people trying to climb the fences, cell phone video. We had 10 to 12-foot fences all around the entire perimeter of the property. They were there to try to keep that crowd in check as you moved in and had tickets and went to the event, but they ended up trapping people. We're going to look at that fencing. We're going to look at how many entrances and exits there were. Were there major primary entrances? Were there other exits that people could use to get out of the property? We're going to look at some of the other possible attacks that could have taken place. Was the fencing appropriate? Were the barriers appropriate? You know, could somebody have driven a truck into that property and set off explosives like in Manchester? So we're going to start looking at the entire property, the entire venue, and we're going to look at the actions the people took. Where did they go to help them survive, and where did ones end up that did not survive?
And you know, we heard audio because of all of the cell phone video that we've gotten from the scene. We hear audio, obviously, of the shots just being fired off in rapid succession. We hear people screaming, we hear people crying, we hear people yelling. What we don't hear, for a while we even still heard music. What we didn't hear was any sort of official announcement or alarm telling people what to do.
We're going to be looking at that preparation too. You know, like I said, were there other exits they could open up to let people out? Were there people trained to direct people out? Was there anyone that was on the PA or the sound system that was obviously blaring the music out to everybody, telling people, go out the west side, go out the north side, make sure you spread out? Was there anybody directing that traffic? Was there anybody with air horns, say, security staff that were in different places getting people saying, come to me, this is an exit, this is where you can get out? So we're going to look at that event preparation so that we can plan in the future and say, we need to do some things differently.
Because that's how you prevent bottlenecks, and you were talking to us about this before on the midday show today, about how that is one of the huge dangers here. You're up against the shooter as well as thousands of other people who are panicking and trying to get out at the same time you are.
Right, you've got 2 major incidents. You're trying to take cover from that shooter to protect yourself from being a shooting victim, but you're also protecting yourself from the crowd who is panicking. The 2 things that people usually do, if you don't have training, you freeze up. You don't know what to do. You're absolutely terrified. You might stand up and make yourself a victim, try to climb a fence, presenting a target to the shooter, make yourself a victim, or you may freak out. out and just run and not know what to do. And sometimes that crowd can be like a wave, and if you get swept up in it, your injuries could be catastrophic from being trampled.
And let's also talk about one other thing. You noticed that when all of this started to transpire and people started trying to get out of the way, you saw in at least some of these video clips lights being popped on.
Yeah, we also saw that. Not only did we not hear an announcement telling people to take cover to get down to exit, but we saw that the venue lights came on. Unfortunately, those lights illuminated the crowd even more, giving the shooter more of an opportunity. Instead of shooting into the dark or into a massive crowd, he could now pick victims out and see them in the light.
Let's talk about Austin City Limits Music Festival, which is going to be taking place the next couple of weekends down in Austin. We're talking about much larger crowds than what we saw in Las Vegas over the weekend. You've been around in law enforcement for a long time. You've dealt with this sort of thing for a long time. How much do you think they are looking at what happened in Vegas and maybe going back to the drawing board at this late hour?
I hope they look at it right now. I hope they grab their plan, and I hope they start going through page by page and saying, what else can we do? We may have 100,000 people or more out here for this event. Are there elevated positions for the shooter? Office buildings, hotels, anything around, trees, climbing trees, right? Look at those elevated positions. Look at the venue. Look at the fencing. Look at the ingress and the egress. Don't just be worried about the tickets or your magnetometer as people are going in. Protect yourself from those car bombs, those truck bombs that we see. I hope that they are looking at their plan right now today and going through there and saying, how can we harden this target to make it as difficult as possible for someone to commit one of these attacks?
Because you've seen a lot of these large venues where lots of people are gathered, and do they often take into consideration these high points? It seems like security is usually covered around the perimeter and down in here, but maybe we're not thinking up here. We
do a good job, you know, putting up the barricades, blocking the entrances and exits, things like that, controlling the people going in and out. But you're right, we don't often look up. And part of being situationally aware, you learn this if you're a police officer, you learn this especially if you're on a tactical team. You're looking not only all around you, you're looking above you. Right?
You wrote about this a long time ago, didn't you?
I wrote about this, 20 years ago, and how you need to be prepared for situations like this. You've got to know everything that's going on around you. You've got to be looking. If you go into those events, everybody went in that main entrance. Show me where the other exits are. Show me how I can get out with my family. Show me where is the place. There are a lot of, there's a lot of things here, Jason, that were on the grounds that are fixed objects that you could hide behind. That's perfect cover from those bullets. It also, when that crowd is coming around you, stand on the downward side of it. Let the crowd go around you. Keep your family close to you. Then you can exit when it's safe. Part of the escape model is assess. You constantly have to assess what you're doing and what's going on.
What you're telling us here, though, is that you cannot rely on authorities or organizers or anyone else, that going into something like this, obviously you're there to have a great time, but you also need to be thinking as soon as you walk in, where are the exits? Where could I go? What if something happened?
And it's an old saying in law enforcement, you have to be prepared, not paranoid. I'm not telling you not to go out to these events. I'm simply saying learn the model, right? Learn the 6 steps that you can use to survive. Practice it, train, talk with your children about it, talk with your family, even having a reunion site. If we get separated, we're going to meet over on the corner of that building right there at that little cafe. So if we get separated and anything happens, that's where we're going to meet. Little things that you can do. If you take 5 minutes out to visit with your friends or family, you're going to be better prepared if one of these incidents should happen.
So always great to be behind a big barrier like this when something starts to go wrong. Also, if there are tents set up, which there were, you can go under one of those, because then you're no longer visible to the gunman. And then finally, you know, we've heard this a lot with, you know, if you're being chased by bees, for instance, to run in that zigzag pattern. You recommend that in a case like this, if you're able to run away.
If you find yourself in that open area where you've got nowhere else to go to, get low as low as you can, run in a zigzag pattern until you can find cover or find concealment. You know, I noticed on the video this morning, the VIP tent was almost empty. That was a huge tent right close to the stage. That would have got people out of the shooter's line of sight.
So my last question, you know, you've talked about this for many years, and you say over and over again that the public needs to be prepared, and perhaps, you know, that call is getting louder and louder with each event that we see like this. Are you thinking we need to, that we finally reached the stage where we need to have mass events? I mean, first responders do this all the time, where they train for these worst case scenarios. Do the rest of us need to be brought into that training?
Yeah, I think it's good for every citizen. We have CPR training, right? How many hundreds of thousands, millions of people know CPR? They can save a life. We have defibrillator training. Why not having training on how to survive an active shooter, a mass shooting, one of these terrorist type events? Unfortunately, they're becoming more and more common, and you've got to be prepared as a citizen. You want to protect yourself and your family and your loved ones. So 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of training, and you'll know what to look for, how to stay aware, and get out of one of these events alive.